Alright, we are recording in first things first. Lenticular Dust in Detail, NGC 4753 is this image, and it's, kinda wild, isn't it? I mean, that is a real image, and just is fascinating. Anyway, doing a couple things different with this video, which is also a second time I'm recording it. One is, you may notice movement is different. I figured out why this 60 FPS webcam in my laptop never looked like it before. I had to turn off a setting, and then adjust the gamma to correct, so faster, but hopefully the brightness is good enough for everyone. Anyway, the other is I'm gonna try to do scripts. I don't know if this will actually work as a script, but at least I got notes. At least I have notes that I can go through for this, so yeah, I might be looking back and forth to them. But yeah, so anyway, let's actually get to this. So, being a Let's Build a Spaceship playlist, it kind of makes sense that I have a video talking about the actual ship design manufacturer. And in my Catherineverse thus far, the main ship design is what I call a Classic Merc. So I'm going to go through why it has that name. Because there's a reason to it. It's not just I pulled a name out. So it's classic because they are pretty well loved. The designs are actually pretty well loved by those that have it. Although it's kind of fallen out of favor. I'll get to that. But it's called the Mercury, the Classic Mercury, because they were all manufactured at Mercury. And that there is actually some significance there. Mercury is an interesting planet in the solar system, because it's actually, besides just being the closest planet to the sun, it's also the only one that is tidally locked to the sun. What that means is that the rates of revolution and rotation for the planet match. So only one side of it ever faces the sun. And another example of this would actually be the moon, although it's tidally locked to the Earth, not to the sun. Okay? So what I describe in, I believe it's in, I call my ship Catherine. Is that because of this tidal locking, what that means is, one side of the planet is always receiving sunlight, the other side is always dark. So around the terminator, that's the boundary between light and dark side, manufacturing systems have been built. So on the light side, there we go. So on the light side, you would basically have systems set up that would capture the energy, and then it uses it running across the manufacturing system, and whatever is unused during the manufacturing process would just be vented out on the dark side. How exactly that venting would work, I'm not sure. Different talk. Let's just go with that. That's somewhere else. Since it's not like you have rivers you can dump heat into or an atmosphere, but in any case, it still is that's what you do. And this is actually so significant. This capability to do with the planet is so significant that I do describe in I Call My Ship Catherine, which follows a terraformer, that occasionally that is something he actually is contracted to do, is to take a planet that is not tidally locked and make it tidally locked. That I do have systems set up there that he can do that, because sometimes that's what the customer wants, is tidal lock, so we can build up systems along the terminator, just like what's on Mercury. Alright, now I want to go back to... okay. That covers my notes for the Mercury portion. So why are the ships called Classic? Well, it's because they're much loved, which I think I already said. But yeah, they're much loved by those who have them, and many of those who do not have them, because they actually feature... The main reason why is because of a modular design, and I described this because it'll kind of help for one thing. The way you can think of the modules is this. Think of a cube that has just doors all on every side, basically airlocks, though I'll get to that in a little bit. But you have that, and then you just imagine, unfortunately, don't have a cube here, but you just took one side and pulled it out. So you get a rectangular prism where one side, we'll just say it's this side, has 5 doors, one top, bottom, left, right, back, and then the forward is on the other side of the rectangle, and this is just a wall. So yes, they are airlocks, but it's a little weird. So this forward airlock is just going to be a door. It wouldn't actually have its own airlock seal, because that's something would mount to that. On the other side, I do kind of describe, maybe poorly, in a letter from Catherine, that you actually have like it's technically on the backside, it's 2 sets of doors, and one will just move out like that to form an actual airlock that'll seal. Because you don't need that if you just have like one module connected to another. Technically, do have another one of these. But yeah, if you just have that connected, then you wouldn't even bother with the airlock. You would just even have the door open all the time, potentially. So technically, there would be 3 doors, but the 2 that are like this would be, when together, locked together. Like you couldn't have one open and the other not. Anyway. I was going off note there, so let me just check. Yeah, that's right. So, one consequence of that, though, is that each of these modules have to be their own self-contained spaceships. So that means they have to have their own environmental systems, artificial gravity systems, internal and external. Get to that. Their own computer systems, JSA power systems, they need those too. Their own propulsion systems, including both thrusters and main engines. And warp emitters, or at least support for warp emitters. Warp emitters I basically treat as special in that, especially for this, because these are compact warp emitters. I imagine them as something about the size of like a thermos. And you have these clips that they go in that you can power up. But it is when you need to remove one because it's damaged, you want to replace it, you just grab it like a thermos and pull it out. And you can force another one in. At one point, I've seen, think of a fuse. Like not a screw-in fuse, but one that actually does have, between the 2 prongs. Kind of like that. Because I have actually seen, don't know if I have one, like a small fuse, where it was just like glass in the middle and then silvered metal caps on either end. Kind of like that, but larger. But that would be forced in and pulled out. That's how I imagine those working. The thing is, it's kind of only the Classic Mercs that use those. So you might not have every module with all the warp emitters in there, because they might be, well, you might have them in every module, but as they get burned out in the ones that actually use the warp emitters, you just take it out of that one that I'm not using it there and put it in. The pieces that, the modules that have the warp emitters that are being used would constitute the spine. So back to this thing, just to use as reference. The spine is just in the center of the ship, essentially. And then you take the other modules and you would, like attach it here, and, build it out, like a Cartesian plot, on the axes. You'd be doing that. But only the spine actually has warp emitters that are in use. So that way the warp field is made like this, like that going all around. So you wouldn't have like a rib. These pieces are referred to as ribs. You wouldn't have a rib there going up and the warping fields powered here, because you would need it to span the entire length of the ship, and the ship can get very long. So that would be very, very difficult to do and a waste of energy compared to just running it along the spine. I'm getting a little bit off note, so let me just check. I don't know if I will ever be able to do full scripts, but yes, I should also mention that. So yes, they all have their own systems. Oh, and one thing I actually forgot from the notes is the Cherenkov probes. They would also all need to have those. So while they do all have their own main engines on there, which those main engines, unlike the warp emitters, the main engines could be used on multiple ships, so that's not so bad. That's not so unique there that it can cause issues. But it would only be the ones at the rear and the front that you're actually going to be using those main engines. Obviously the ones at the rear, hang on. There we go. Gotta love modern technology and cameras. Anyway, at the rear, obviously, those are going to be the main engines providing the main thrust, so aimed out that way, so you go that way. But you would also need some at the front for retro engines to slow you down, especially in the case of an emergency. You might be able to have the ship slow down just by no longer firing the rear engines, the main engines. You might be able to do that in some cases, because space, it's a lot of it is a vacuum, or at least has average very low density. But in some circumstances, you would see more mass around. Like when you enter into a solar system and you got the solar wind, you probably still need to fire them, but it's still you might want to accelerate very fast, but slowing down, you might be willing to go, yeah, we can take our time with that. So you don't need to fire the retro engines as powerfully. And as far as the ribs, no, you wouldn't use those if you don't need to, and they likely wouldn't be oriented in the correct direction anyway. One thing I didn't mention in my notes as well is the concept of hairy arms. I mentioned Cherenkov probes, which I'm pretty sure I do talk about those in the warp travel video, so you can check that. But you would need Cherenkov probes on all these pieces, but because unfortunately I don't really have anything good as a demo here, but it is, you have the spine piece, you have the ribs going out. It is reasonable that you may have a main when the rib piece is going across here, so giving you a square like that. But you might not have it because, if you also go out that way, you'd have like this. You might not have a module here. Might not have that there, but you still need the Cherenkov probes to monitor if the warp field falls down. So hairy arms are just like long, thin pieces that would not have any interior to them. All the other modules, there's a corridor, you walk through them. You wouldn't have that on the hairy arms. They're just for holding Cherenkov probes and cameras to monitor them. Yeah, that's a good one to cover next, which is, as I mentioned already, they all have their own main engines. They would also have their own thrusters, which means then that they actually have the ability to assemble themselves into the ship. And this is used. In A Letter from Catherine, it is described that when Roman, at one point when leaving the space station, he lets the pieces fly out, and they actually will assemble themselves into at least partial cubes and such around the cargo he wants to deliver. He wants to take on and deliver. And that's for a couple reasons. One is, all this cargo needs to be in some kind of cargo container. It might be very much like what we have today, where it's very standardized. Some might not be. Some might be more special just because it's designed for a specific use. Those would probably have their own thrusters on there. Some of the cargo containers would as well, but not necessarily all. So every module not only has their own thrusters that allow them to orient around cargo, but they also have external, I believe I did mention that, external artificial gravity, so that they can actually use that to manipulate and move around cargo to assemble it into that partial cube, and then the whole thing of all the modules in that partial cube would come onto the spine and assemble it fully that way. But you could also have some cargo, if it can pilot itself, maneuver directly there. I just doubt that would be the predominant way that would happen. Okay. Yeah, get to that, and then why they fell out of favor. So, one thing about this design, I do describe it as a supership, that the Classic Mercs are superships for two reasons. One is, they are big. I'm going to come back to that. The other is, it is basically superstructure. Because it is, it's that, and then that. It's just a bunch of pieces that have a massive encompassing volume, but the actual volume inside is very little. It's a superstructure. Yes, they are also huge. I try very intentionally, by the way, this is intentional, to avoid certain specifics in the Catherine verse. So, for example, I never say how many years into the future this is. I mean, think about Star Trek. We actually know the years of that. It's the 23rd and 24th centuries, I recall. So we know approximately how far away that is. We even know birth dates for some of them. I'm not doing that. I don't want to do that. Ain't nothing wrong with that. It's just I don't want to do that. But I'm also like that with the ship, where it's like, how big is it? I don't know. I don't know specifically. And it's modular, so it can vary. But I think the only two times I've had anything specific-ish was to say that you would measure the total encompassing volume, at least, in cubic kilometers, because it's big. I think I also have a line, I don't remember, I call my ship Catherine, that these things, because of how large they are, they're actually banned from war, because if you just put a bunch of mass on them, and it would be perfect for ramming into things. Like, yeah, no, we don't allow that. It's too nuts. and would be too difficult to stop. So it's like, no, just no. The other way that I compare it, that I talk about its size, is I'm pretty sure in A Letter from Catherine, Roman does say that Nancy Grace, his ship, when fully built out, can actually rival the size of the space station he's on, which is like an entire city. Like that, there's a large number of people living there. And it's designed, by the way, part of the reason he likes that space station is it also has modular design. Not totally unlike the classic Mercs, which he likes that design of as well for it being modular. So he just likes that this has a lot of potential to grow, but it still is. That's how big Nancy Grace can be. And she would only be, pretty sure I do describe, is basically on par with the original classic Mercs. She's a late model. The original classic Mercs, the early model classic Mercs, have a mildly different design. Mostly it's aesthetic. The way I envision it, like if somebody wanted to try drawing them out, is like a modern diesel electric locomotive, in that it's very angular. It's an industrial look, a very industrial look. And you also have, I'm pretty sure you do see pipes and such on the outside. I'm not sure if that's running cables or running pneumatics directly over there, but it's like, that kind of thing is there because it's industrial. It doesn't need to look pretty. They do look actually kind of nice. I mean, they have a good aesthetic to them, in my opinion, for what they are, but it is an industrial aesthetic. But as the classic Mercs are falling out of favor because they're industrial, they're kind of expensive. I mean, it's like all those warp field emitters are costly. So when other ships were being designed that was smaller and cheaper, or just fixed hull, and that made them a little bit cheaper. I mean, technically, well, not technically, would be the case. A fixed hull ship of the same encompassing volume as a classic Merc, technically the amount of material needed to make that would be less because it's just the outside. Like that would be more efficient than all the modules. Classic Merc still has many advantages there, and there are very, very few ships that rival them in that size. So no one ever made a fixed hull ship that big, but it still was. Fixed hull ships are cheaper and end up outcompeting. But on their way towards ultimately being outcompeted, the design of the classic Merc shifted both towards being smaller, so they would have fewer modules included. The Nancy Grace is a later model, so it initially had fewer modules with it, but Roman managed to get more, so it is on the size or potentially a little bit larger than the original classic Mercs that were purely industrial design. But also the aesthetic there is more like a passenger train, and specifically for me, I imagine like the Amtrak trains, that kind of this smooth curved metal on the outside, and also if it isn't completely smooth, it has like a ribbed pattern, so you would not have like cables and such, or pipes running along the outside of the Nancy Grace, these later models. So the visual aesthetic is different between them, but it is also kind of, well, they wanted to try to make it more appealing so that people would also want to buy them, even though they technically all are meant for industry. They are massive, powerful cargo ships. So eventually they were outcompeted, and so you stopped seeing them, but there's still a lot of people that really do like them. And fortunately, one thing is that because they're modular, you can use, like an early model classic Merc, you can get additional modules from people that aren't using anymore, that are selling, whatever. Same thing with the late models. So that's how Rowan managed to build up Nancy Grace to be on the scale of one of the earlier models. I do not believe there is more to mention on this. And I don't think I will find more if I trying to scan through the notes either. As it is, I went a little bit outside them, but, it's a bit better. Alright. Bit better than when I did it before. More focused. At least I hope so. Anyway, I'll see you next time.